Excellent. Well, hey man, it's a pleasure talking with you today. Appreciate you coming on.
No worries.
Hey, let me introduce you guys. This is my friend Chris Housenick. Like out of all of my friends, he is a guy who has been reading your book, loves Van Halen. As you can tell by his background, he has the same mask he wears while teaching. But man, you know, Trey told me about you. Shout out to Trey McCool for the introduction. And man, it's again, just thank you for coming on and talking with us.
You're welcome. It's give you 10 seconds about Trey. I could talk a lot longer, but he's one of these guys who sort of sticks with you and funny memories. And we have a lot of funny memories. You know, I haven't seen him since the 90s. And anyway, I could think back on some things that happened in Mississippi and just laugh right now. Great guy. So I'm glad to have connected to you through you and Trey.
Man, he has helped me a lot. I've been teaching and working on the same campus for this is my third year full time. But man, he's really helped me a lot. So it's been nice having him. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, Housenick and I train at the gym together. He's a political scientist also. So, you know,
oh, I didn't realize everyone here was an academic. Oh boy, this is going to like up the, I'm not going to raise my game. Hold on.
Oh no.
All of a sudden I gotta hang on. Hey, you want to turn it on? I get the wall of books over here. I'll turn it on.
I need a better background. Hold on.
Exactly. There you go.
Yeah. No, it's, I was telling Brian, I did finish your book. I read through Van Halen Rising, and it was one of the things I had to get used to was one of your favorite things being written in like an academic style, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you know, I did a first book, which was my dissertation, which came out as a book at University of Georgia Press. And like, you know, getting from the sort of academic writing style to Van Halen Rising's writing style was like, you know, complete transformation, but I left the footnotes in, you know, I couldn't get rid of everything. So,
oh yeah. So what was your dissertation on?
So my dissertation was on traveling circuses. And so it was on these big shows that would tour the entire country, but particularly I focused on the South and Georgia. And so when in the summertime, Ringling Brothers and a number of the other huge outfits would mostly come out of the North and come to the South. And I kind of looked at the way that people interacted on Circus Day, which was the day that the shows came to town. And then the general, the kind of sectional tension that was there for a long time. I shouldn't say for a long time, but definitely during Reconstruction, a little bit afterwards, where it was, you know, these Yankee shows were coming into the South, and there was a lot of discourse about that in Southern newspapers and things like that. So I looked at that, and then how the circus became accepted not just politically, which faded rather quickly, but more as a religious resistance declined as well, because evangelicals were very against the circus. But you know, by the 20th century, that had the circus had sort of slipped as a moral threat. Of the things had become much more seemingly threatening than the circus. But initially, yeah, the circus was a big, in the post Reconstruction South, the circus coming was a big deal, and it was, you know, definitely some people really didn't like it.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. So, hey, here's a question for you. I saw just breezing through your stuff, some about a bit about the publications you've written for, like Guitar World and Spin Mag. Like, how and when did you start getting into writing about music? It seems like it predates even Van Halen Rising.
Yeah, you know, it actually tracks pretty closely with Van Halen Rising. What ended up happening was, you know, I got tenure in 2010, and I took the year with tenure, and I had, my initial thought was, you know, you sort of climb that mountain to get tenure, and it was, you know, the whole, you guys understand the whole deal around that. And I figured like the first 30 days I was going to try to do something just fun and relaxing, and just, I wanted to do something on Van Halen or music or Van Halen. And I was going to do a little, what I thought was going to be like maybe a little article from like a website or something. And that sort of snowballed into a book. And so I was still doing my more mainstream academic stuff really through all that time in terms of, you know, publications. I would do smaller publications, but this thing that I thought was going to be like a fun small side project just kind of turned itself into a book, just from me getting interested in the topic and the amount of material that was there. that's a long-winded way of me saying that I didn't really start doing music writing until really right around the time Van Halen Rising came out. I did a little bit of stuff related to the book that was put out at the same time, like a couple of magazine articles and things like that related to like an excerpt and a couple of other things. And then I did some freelance stuff because in 2015 I left my position because my wife and I were working in different cities. We're living in Tulsa, but we had met in Springfield, Missouri. She had gotten a job at University of Tulsa. And so we had moved to Tulsa. We had kids, and I had done this thing where I would go up during the school week, during the school year, and teach from Monday to Thursday, basically. And it just became unworkable once we had twins. So then I sort of transitioned to doing freelance writing, but it was, something that was not exactly a game plan that I had sort of laid out. It was just sort of circumstances. We had children, and it just became impossible. And, that's what ended up happening. Somebody kind of had to be default and be home with kids, and that's what ended up happening. So it just worked out that I left and did music writing full time, but it was not like I had some sort of master plan to do this.
Yeah. So you're in Tulsa now?
Yep. We live in Tulsa. Full decade we've been here. Yep.
Man, that's just right up the road. I can't tell you how many times we've been to Tulsa. Chris has competed jiu-jitsu in Tulsa. I've competed in jiu-jitsu in Tulsa. I feel like I've been there.
Call me.
Yeah,
we'll
get together.
Me and two friends, we saw Van Halen in Tulsa 6 years ago.
Sure.
I think when they came through on the last big tour.
Yeah, I go down to the BOK quite frequently to see shows. In fact, I had tickets to see Kiss and David Lee Roth, and that afternoon at 1:30 they canceled that show. And so, as I joke on Twitter a lot of times, like the show I saw in an arena before that was Paw Patrol. So if that's the last arena show I ever see on planet Earth, it's going to be a sad testament to my musical end. I assume that won't happen, but that's still the last. We went with the kids, and then
Yeah, I saw Roger Waters at the BOK.
Yeah,
and it was an amazing show.
We built the whole wall. Yeah, that was pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, you've written 3 total books? I guess you had a recent book come out too. Did I see that like this year? Right.
So I did the Circus book came out in 2008. Then I did the Van Halen Rising book, came out in 2015. And then earlier this year in April, I published Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life in Music. And that's Ted Templeman, who produced the Van Halen records and the Doobie Brothers and Little Feat and Carly Simon and all these other huge acts. I did his authorized biography, so I worked with him on his autobiography. Pretty much starting in 2016, it started then, and then so basically I started pitching the idea to him to 2016 early on and saying, hey, do you want to do this? And he was sort of at the beginnings, he was sort of lukewarm about it because he's not a guy who ever wanted to write a book, but and we kind of came up with a plan, and he got interested, and we worked on it, and it came out just a few months ago. So basically, right around the time that the COVID really hit, the lockdown started, and all that stuff, which is sort of mixed results with the book. But yeah, that's when it happened. It came out in April.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. A little spin-off project of the Van Halen book. I mean,
yeah. So I got to know Ted by doing the Van Halen Rising book. I got to know him. Interviewed him, and it's funny, the book, I don't remember if there was an advanced copy of the book out or something, and I got this email from Ted Templeman. I hadn't talked to him in about a year and a half. I did this interview with him, and we might send him a thank you email, but I hadn't talked to him. And it was like Van Halen Rising, and I was like, you're sort of like, first you're like, oh, I got an email from Ted Templeman, and you're like, oh, I got an email from Ted Templeman. I hope he didn't like whatever. I mean, I didn't know, like maybe he was like, heard something, I irked about it, but he had seen a copy of the book or read the book and really was really, really complimentary of it. So that's what sort of happened. He liked the Van Halen Rising book. And then we did actually a book event together in Pasadena. So Van Halen's from Pasadena, and I went out there and launched the book there at a bookstore in Pasadena, California, an indie bookstore called Vroman's, and did a book signing. And I invited Ted, and he agreed to come out for it and sign books. So that was amazing for me. A huge, wonderful event to have this guy who had, Grammy winner and had done all these amazing records. And he, it was great. So we kind of struck up a little bit of a friendship, and took it from there. And so, yeah, did his life story, which was a fun and definitely a different kind of experience when you're dealing with a living person. It's obviously all the guys at Van Halen are living, but it wasn't an authorized book. And so I wasn't having someone basically going, I don't like this passage, or I like this passage, or do more of this, less of this, it's an editor or stuff, but you didn't have the subject of the book, reading it and going, whatever.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you have anything else planned in this same wheelhouse of this topic?
I have all sorts of book ideas, but I think you guys kind of understand if you have children, I don't. Your daily, well, it's just the daily agenda of not having the school open, and it was we took the kids to school, we dropped them off, I came home, I did whatever I had to do for the house, and I wrote, and then I picked up the kids, and then away we went. And so that and I wrote in that time period when they were not in the house, but guess what? They never leave the house. So there's a different deal. So, I definitely have some other book ideas. I haven't really even tried to get rolling on them because it's just been, I find trying to get focused time to work is challenging. And by 8 o'clock at night, I'm usually done, which coincides with the time that they go to bed. So I'm like, I'm done. I'm brain dead. So, but yeah, I mean, it's obviously this stuff will all come to an end. That's a serious, more serious point. I definitely have another Van Halen book in me, but I have other ideas too. And so it's a matter of trying to, also try to get the time to sort of, you guys know, it's been a crazy year to kind of sit back and kind of reflect on what to do next. It's even that has been sort of a difficult thing for me to get in that headspace for. So.
Yeah, it is. It's been a heck of a year. I was like, on the silver linings, and it still am. I mean, it's getting better all the time, I guess. I own a business here in Russellville, Martial Arts Academy. We just moved to a gigantic new location, and then 2 weeks later, COVID hit. We had to close. But honestly, we're doing better than ever. We have more members than ever. That's great. It's a weird time, but there's it's just the uncertainty of it seems like to be a more uncertain time than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there are these unusual silver linings. So you guys might appreciate this too. So when the book came out, Amazon had it in stock, and the press printed it enough. They printed, I don't know how many books they printed initially, but there were plenty of books. They had sent them to Amazon, and then when the book came out, the day like everyone had pre-ordered, they said it's not available. We'll let you know when it's available to ship. Long story short, what Amazon decided to do, probably a lot of people, was, and like, unless it's like, maybe like the top 100 books or top 500 books, all the other books, from what I understand, they basically said, okay, look, if you're, if you guys are ordering toilet paper, if Chris is ordering toilet paper and some other goods, we'll throw the book in the box. But if Chris is just ordering the book, he's going to have to wait. And so, that was I don't even know how that ended up washing out, but I know a lot of people got frustrated waiting for the book and just ordered the audiobook or ordered the Kindle. And so it's like, in the big scheme of things, it's like, I don't know how it all ended up for the book sales. I mean, because there's no really way to know, like, actually, like, I don't have access to the information to go like, 300 people canceled their order, or what we projected was this and it went there. But, that was the one thing I know happened for sure, is a lot more people did the ebook and they did the audiobook, because that was obviously instant delivery. But yeah, the whole, you can, like you said, like you closed, it's like, you're like, all right, the book's going to ship. And then it's like, people are like emailing and go, I pre-ordered the book in November last year when it came on Amazon. It says it's not available. And I call the press, and they're like, they have the books. They're in the warehouse. They just, whatever, they were going through their stuff with COVID. But I think probably what they were doing to try to deal with being overwhelmed at that time, they just decided to ship things that were not ship, quote unquote, non-essentials, like CDs and things like that probably weren't shipping, but they were,
The publishing industry got hit hard by COVID. I backed a Kickstarter for a book. It was supposed to ship, be done and printed by April.
Right.
It arrived Tuesday.
Wow. That's crazy.
But it's just because, crazy. Non-essential printing and publishing and binding and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I was going to ask you, how many face-to-face interviews did you do, like, on the ground in California? Because it seemed like you interviewed a lot of, like, I mean, not like, people and things of that nature, who were big into that scene in the really early 70s?
So I probably did less than 10 in-person interviews in California. Almost all of them I did over the phone. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there was some email stuff I did with people occasionally just for email, but most of it was done over the phone. I mean, I lived in Oklahoma. It was like, it was kind of an interesting experience because at first, when you're trying to do a book like this, nobody knows who you are. I'm not some big name. They're like, oh, like Bob Woodward's calling. Of course, I'll take the call. They're like, I'm like, just some guy who's got a Ph.D. and that even makes you suspect in the eyes of a lot of people. And as you know, but after a while, it was, I would talk to people on the phone because I talked to so many people who were from the Pasadena area, all these people, and people were like, what high school did you go to? And I'd be like, Sparta. They're like, Sparta? What's that? I'm like, it's in New Jersey. They're like, oh, you didn't grow up here? Because it was just like, they had kind of lost track, a couple of times people had lost track of who introduced you to who. And they're like, well, so, but, for me, it was actually, a good way to work. I could call people pretty late at night here, whatever, in California. And I talk to them. And when I get ready to get off the phone, they might say, who else should I talk to? Who else should I talk to? And they say, hey, you really should call my friend Chris. He had a backyard party and it was a Van Halen backyard party. Or, hey, you know what? You should call this guy Brian. He had a club in the Valley and they hired a lot of bands. I think Van Halen played there, and you call Brian, and, sometimes there were dead ends, but a lot of times they weren't. And you talk to people and kind of get passed along. So I was out there a couple of times, and I did talk to some folks face to face who were accessible, but a lot of times it was like, some of these people they moved to Oregon or something like that. It was just a matter of like, they don't live in Oklahoma, they don't live in California anymore. They lived in Oregon.
See, that for Brian, there's a lot of what I really appreciated about the book was it covered a lot of the history that I like, the prehistory. Like everybody kind of jumps on the wagon at 78, 79. But these guys were grinding in like 73, 74, going to like literally playing these backyard parties. It's just, it's very dazed and confused. I think you mentioned it.
Totally.
But it's like, imagine you having a backyard party, Brian, in about 76, and there's like 1,000 people in the backyard party. A police helicopter flies over, and those kind of events is what kind of helped get them on the radar eventually. But I think that was a lot of what I really enjoyed reading about.
The thing is about that stuff that's interesting is those parties is that was always sort of like Van Halen folklore. And you'd read interviews in different music magazines in the 80s, and you'd see a couple of sentences mentioned about backyard parties and things like that. And, to sort of spend time talking to people who threw these parties or went to these parties. And I ended up talking to in some cases, 2 or 3 dozen people who would go to one of these parties because they were huge. And, then you would do a search in the Pasadena newspaper, and I would see these little tiny articles. You guys understand? And it's like, the fourth page of the paper, it's the bottom of the fold, and it says like, police break up teen party. And you would read it like, it never mentioned Van Halen because they weren't famous. It's 1975 or 74, but it would be like police broke up, a rowdy backyard party with loud bands, a noise violation and stuff, and you were like, oh my gosh, it tracks with the flyer. And it's like, it's, 500 people there, rocks and bottles were thrown at the police, blah, 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 or whatever. It's like, you're like, wow, it tracks with the stories. And it was really, interesting to see, like you said, about that sort of getting a reputation, and they became known in Los Angeles in part for that stuff before they ever played nightclubs formally where they actually played in Hollywood and stuff like that. They were kind of on marquees that mattered. That was years before that happened.
I think the other two thing that I appreciated, I think Brian would, those guys were grinders. When you're trying to describe what their days were like, they were playing, what's the name of the club? I don't want to mispronounce it with a G, where they became Gazzari's. These guys would go, they would practice 3 or 4 hours, then go play 5 1-hour sets at Gazzari's and repeat 4, 5, 6 nights. 6 nights a week sometimes. They're barely, they're making enough to maybe cover guitar strings and stuff like that. But it's like they really, I don't think it was that long ago. I think David Lee Roth was quoted, everybody talks about 10,000 hours to become an expert. Yep. And he said they grinded out that 10,000 hours before they ever had a record deal.
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the more inspiring things about the Van Halen story is, beyond the immigrant aspect, which is really interesting because the brothers came to America in 1962. They didn't speak any English. They came from Holland. And so they were first generation Americans. And then if you think about just the amount of hard work that they put in, it's true. They were working for basically no money, playing a lot of these clubs where they play, and they talk about how at the end of the set at Gazzari's, Bill Gazzari was kind of this notorious tightwad, but if he had a good night and he sold a lot of drinks, he would go up to David Lee Roth and have like a $10 bill or a $20 bill, and he'd stick it in Roth's pocket of his shirt, or he'd be like, "Good set tonight, Van. See you again tomorrow night." He actually thought David Lee Roth's first name was. He thought his first name was Van. He thought, like Van Morrison or something. So it was like, Van Heusen or something like that. So that, they talked about how they would, they were just doing this to do it. And the other story I heard from somebody who actually hauled gear for those guys, like a roadie, when they were still in Los Angeles where they had a record deal. And at some point, one of the guys said to him, hey man, like, what if you don't make it? And they were like, "What do you mean?" Like, you have to have that sort of belief that's beyond rationality sometimes with any person who really makes it. You can look at someone like an NFL player or something like that, where you're sort of, maybe like a end of the roster guy, you just, but you stick around. It's sort of that, what are you going to do when you don't make the team? You're like, what do you mean I'm not going to make the team? But those guys worked incredibly hard, and that was the only plan. I mean, that was the thing. Like Eddie Van Halen says, like, I probably would have given, in effect would have said I would have given music lessons and worked in a gas station if I didn't make it in music, or just kept playing nightclubs forever. I would just been playing for no money in nightclubs if we never got famous, because that's all they knew. They were musicians.
Yeah. And I think part of that, you hint at, it comes from their father, his upbringing. And, I have a friend of mine's a music professor here, and it's always, you're playing in big bands, it's for chair. First chair, right. Second chair, third right. chair. So, dad's like always on them. You got to be practicing. And now they probably took it to obsessive compulsive levels, but I think that definitely was passed down into them. And you see it when they're putting in that much work.
Yeah, the musical aspect of the family was super. Obviously, the father being a jazz musician, and that's another interesting part of the story too. Is that Jan Van Halen was a clarinet player and a sax player who, was moderately successful in Holland. And it doesn't, I don't mean, he wasn't like some sort of like household name, but he was a guy who would play in orchestras that were on TV and had a good career as a musician. But when they came to the States, big band music was kind of like, jazz was sort of dead in terms of like trying to get gigs in nightclubs. And so he ended up playing at like, Polish American Unity halls and stuff like that. In other words, he went from basically being a guy who had bands that would work in part of orchestras to somebody who couldn't really get gigs that would pay any money. And actually he used to work as a maintenance man and things like that. And so growing up, the boys, when the boys were growing up, he, I think, really focused on that as become a professional musician, but maybe do it a little differently than I did, because actually, and this is kind of well known, is that the parents wanted them to be concert pianists. And so they took these lessons from this very, very well regarded Russian, if I remember correctly, Russian piano instructor who was quite a big name. And Alex Van Halen tells the story about even at some point the family finally said, I don't remember the whole context, but they couldn't afford the lessons anymore. And basically, like, look, I'm sorry, we can't afford the lessons anymore. And he actually kept teaching them for free. So because he thought the boys had talent. And so that was the whole thing. And then when the boys went to rock and roll, that caused a lot of angst in the family. But I think it's one of those things you couldn't quite stop it. It was kind of built into the brothers. They really loved that type of music, and I'm sure the father saw that and they shifted gears and quit the piano lessons.
That's interesting too, because I've met at least one guy personally that migrated from Holland that was like one of the most shredding guitar players I ever personally got to be around. Now I'm sitting back wondering what the musical culture of Holland's like.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the other thing too that you'd be interested in is the whole, Brian, is the whole martial arts aspect. Is that Roth got into martial arts? Even early on, I would talk to people when I did the book, and it kind of was irrelevant for the story of the Van Halen story. But he was into martial arts when he was in high school. He was doing it. I can't remember the where he trained, but it was a place that was a well-known. I want to say Parker. Does that sound right? But I can't remember the discipline. I have to look up. I think the guy's last name was Parker, who was the head of it. But it was it became part of his repertoire of stuff. And of course, later on, in the videos, he did all the karate kicks and all that other stuff. But that was another part of the, that sort of that physical training that they did. The brothers were obsessed with music, and Roth was sort of obsessed with making himself into like the ultimate rock star. It's like, it's like, was it enough just to be able to like sing or whatever else? He had to learn to dance, and then did all the other martial arts stuff. That was, when he did the arena shows, that really became kind of a centerpiece for him, especially by the 80s.
Hey, Chris, who is it with, isn't it like Def Leppard's front man that is into Thai boxing? And
No, it's their guitar player. Phil Colleen. You remember Behind the Music?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of those guys, I think I grew up in the arena rock era, and a lot of those guys have fought addiction in various ways. Alice Cooper picked up golf.
Right.
Phil Colleen basically picked up Muay Thai in the mid to late 80s. I mean, I think he's the guy. Basically, Google a picture of Def Leppard, the whole band. I don't think he ever wears a shirt, And if I were 62 or 63 in that rip, I'm not sure I'd wear a shirt either.
Yeah, he and has some interesting like workout videos too. He's like vegan, and he's like really, he's like super fit. It's kind of insane. Yeah, he's definitely a freak of nature in that sort of way. He does not look his age at all. It's incredible.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of great kickboxers that come from Holland too. There's a big like Muay Thai culture there. Everybody calls it Dutch style kickboxing.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it too, because they focus more on like sort of, you could just say traditional or Western boxing principles, but then they also kick you in the leg really hard, which you don't get in like your traditional styles a lot of the time. So like it's a world renowned way of looking at fighting. So I'm a big fan of Dutch style. So, hey, I got a couple of questions for you, man. Like one thing I was talking to Trey about why I wanted to sit down and talk with you is because, man, long term, I am interested in I have yet to get a publication since I've been out of college working. I'm working on some articles and just small scale stuff, but I am a super fan of the band Widespread Panic. And if I was going to write any history, and I'm very interested, like I remember I was sitting there right when I was about to start teaching full time, and I was about to watch them play. I've seen them play about 25 times. And I was like, I would love to write the history of this band in different parts, because it's such a rich history that ties to so many other things. But really, like I run into this, like I wrote my master's thesis about martial arts, and I end up sorting through a lot of stuff that is written by practitioners and not historians.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what kind of tips do you have for this, not just me and Widespread Panic, but like about just like writing history of music, like if you're dealing with a band, or if you're dealing like what are some things you learned from your Van Halen publication that you think you could pass on?
Well, I think the most important things I would pass on is that people care about, I say people, meaning like a broad reading audience care about stories, and that's, as I'll just speak for myself as an academic historian, you're not really trained to do that. You're trained to analyze minutia and to sort of focus deeply on one small segment of life, whatever that is, whether it's culture, whether it's a political thing, or it's an artifact. And you sort of realize it'd be like, for me, if I approach it that way, it'd be like me writing about Eddie Van Halen's guitar strings. Like, it might be a super important topic, and like I might really care, and maybe 50 other guitar players care, but it's sort of like it gets like, you'd be like, this is important. Maybe it is super important, like Eddie Van Halen's tone, the way he played, and like maybe that explains a lot about Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing. But for most people, they can't connect with that. They're like, they don't play guitar, or they don't get it. And so, you know, for me, the number one thing would be trying to capture the story of the topic. So for Widespread Panic, I mean, even think about those behind the music episodes, they had a narrative that was incredibly predictable. They almost all the episodes were the same. If you think about it, it's like, you know, the rise, the trouble, the fall, the bad stuff. And then then at the end, there was like the happy music started and everyone was great. Like, you're like, oh yeah, my arm fell off from heroin, but I grew it back. And now I'm getting back together with the guys that are going to re-record a new album or something, you know. It's just, so the story, I think the story for that is what matters. And again, look, there's plenty of people who write different types of music books, who can approach topics in a different way. But that's, for me, like, especially with bands, I think that's the, or musical figures, people care about that. And the other thing I would say is that, for me, where a lot of music books fall down is that there isn't enough research done. And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying in general, if anyone picks up your book, anyone's book, and reads it and goes, I knew 90% of this, people feel disappointed. They're like, I knew 75% of this. And so, you know, that was the thing about Van Halen Rising, was, for me, I was like, well, there's been some other Van Halen books written that covered their sort of fame years. And maybe I could do a better job. Maybe I could, who knows? But I thought, when I started looking at the topic and realized there was all this stuff, meaning there were all these years from 1970 or so where the guys first started playing together, the brothers really started playing out for people. They meet David Lee Roth in 73. They don't even get a record deal till 76, 77. And they don't even make a record till late 77, and they don't become stars till 78. So all this stuff that people didn't know. So that's, I love hearing that from Chris, going, hey, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know when I read the book. It was really cool because I didn't know that. So for me, that's the other thing, is that, you know, anyone can put together a book that people will read and go, it was, you know, it's pretty good. But if people are turning pages, every single page, they're like, I knew that, they're going to be like, well, like, what's the thing? And so what's the point? And that goes for anything. If you're writing a book about the U.S. Forest Service and forest fires, and it's just basically like a blow up of the Wikipedia page, it's sort of like, people are like, well, what's the point of that? So, you know, that's where I would say focus on the stories that people can connect with. The struggle to make it, the struggles with record companies, the tension. I think people kind of understand that most bands have like pretty heavy tension inside them. Even super successful bands, there's always, you know, something that doesn't, you know, always work in terms of relationships. And, you know, so that's what I would say. And so I said, you know, if you were going to write a book about Widespread Panic, I don't know anything about Widespread Panic, and I know a couple of their songs. So I would say, I want to know how they formed, how they got their record deal, what scene they came out of, what were the personalities like in the band, who drove, you know, who was the leader, who were the other guys in the band, what was the sort of the tension there in the band, did they split up ever, you know, that type of stuff, and then the wider scene. You know, because I think as people, anytime you hear a great song that matters to you personally, anybody, if you're like, you know, if you love Led Zeppelin, you know, and you'll hear you know, Stairway to Heaven, you know, you might be interested to know, like, hey, you know, what was the band doing when they wrote the song, and what were the lyrics about, and kind of getting deeper beyond sort of like the song meaning, you know, the sort of the context that it came out of. So that's the type of stuff I think that would make for a good rock read, to connect with people.
Is that what you were doing on some like your early articles that just grew into the project? Is just kind of riffing on some of these topics?
Yeah, well, the first thing I was going to write about, this is kind of funny. It was at the time I was thinking I might have to write this under a pseudonym too, because but in Van Halen Rising, I talk about the fact that And this, this was also something that, it was a little bit hard to separate myth from reality, but it did happen that Van Halen was playing in a club in Van Nuys, California, where the owner, because the club was struggling financially, decided to hold wet t-shirt contests in between sets. And, it was 1976 and it was a biker bar. So you could imagine there were a lot of women there who were sort of semi-game to do this. And, but the police came in and raided it. And that was the initial, I was like, wow. I was like, that's kind of crazy. That was the type of thing that I thought maybe I'd write this little, again, maybe under a pseudonym, this little article at Van Halen News Desk about this, just to kind of talk about this interesting little, this little moment in history, how these guys were involved with this bust, the Van Halen guys, and it became sort of part of their larger than life reputation, even before they became famous. And so, that was the type of stuff that I sort of thought, oh, that was kind of interesting, to say the least. And that was, I kept hearing things that were like that, and I was like, oh, this is some pretty good stories. There's pretty crazy. So.
Man, and that's you kind of hit on this a minute ago, but that's some of my mentors have given me the same tips about, particularly with my master's thesis. They're like, yes, you better find something that hasn't been done before.
Right.
Go write about something that if you can be the first guy, and if you're going to write about something that's already been written about, you better put a whole new spin on it, add something else. And man, that's a really good approach. I mean, just kind of common sense, now, but for history writing, that's a method and approach I've heard of multiple times.
I think the other thing too is there are books that come out that people, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, but there'd be things that people, didn't know anything about and the topic before, and it's sort of, you're like, wow, that was amazing. This whole episode that was totally forgotten in history, and suddenly it becomes important. And there are other books where, the one I did, which in some ways was an easier sell. You have something that people know about, but you're saying, okay, you don't know the full story. So, there can be, probably could look up on my shelf and find a book like that, where there's books that come out and this, I didn't know anything about this flood in this part of the United States in the 1910s that really no one's talked about, but it's reshaped the flow of the river. And it's this thing you don't really know about really, really impacted life in America today, or something with obviously with Van Halen, it's sort of obviously a recognizability makes it in some ways an easier sell in some sort of ways. But again, it's I think the thing is, especially with Amazon reviews and these types of things, people find out pretty quickly if it's you didn't deliver something that's interesting or compelling, sort of it's a book about the Patriots Super Bowl. I hate the Patriots, by the way, but it's the Patriots Super Bowl dynasty, but it's all stuff that I already knew, and it's really not that great. So,
without giving,
because I'm a Jets fan, so I'm extremely, extremely traumatized by the last decade of football. So,
oh yeah,
I was going to ask you though.
It's oh yeah, you have to say anything else. You're like, shit, man, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to ask you.
Sure.
You hit on this already, but the editing down to that core story, I'd be interested, because that was the thing. There was a lot of, I could see, your theme is this story of this band going from, 4 random guys in Southern California to how big they were. But you bring in there's really interesting mentions of the classes, David Lee Roth and the Van Halen brothers were in wildly different socioeconomic situations. You bring in race a little bit, Dave Roth, I guess at that point,
classic flamboyant Jewish guy who loved funk music. It's crazy, yeah. Right? He's it's you couldn't write it any better. It's wow, it's amazing. Well, he was amazing. Yeah.
I will say thank you for Google, because I had to look up Black Oak, Arkansas.
Oh,
to find out. Yes.
Did you see? Yeah, it's undeniable.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a wardrobe license.
Yeah, Jim Dandy. I know what's even more interesting is that if you guys look up Black Oak, Arkansas was from Black Oak, and there was actually a compound that they had. The band pooled their money. It's a whole story. and the compound is still there. I think it's like a fishing cabin retreat, but it's like this whole interesting saga. And speaking of bands, like, that was one of the things where I actually was interested in writing about Black Oak, but it would be it'd be a pretty niche thing. But they have check out YouTube. If you look up at Black Oak, Arkansas, look up at their compound. It's amazing. Like, they have this, like, on one of the huge lakes there in Arkansas, they had they basically had this, they basically, we're going to live together and kind of live here. Sorry, I got sidetracked.
Oh, how is Black Oak connected to Van Halen exactly?
I'm laughing because if you put it, you know what, I'll Chris, you tell him. I'm laughing.
Well, the way I read it, basically, David Lee Roth was the one who recognized we need to look like rock stars. We can't just show up in jeans or whatever.
Right.
And the appearance he took was the lead singer, like Jim Dandy was his name, and the band was called Black Oak, Arkansas. And it's like bell bottoms, platforms, like low-rise bell bottoms, and
right,
open shirts and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and,
long blonde hair, hairy chest. So they were kind of like a southern, like a more hicky Leonard Skinner. I know that sounds impossible, but like they played up the southernness to the point of like, it definitely was like, part of it was like tongue in cheek. Like, they had a woman who would come on stage and her name was Ruby. She was quite a great singer, and they would be like, let's bring on stage our kissing cousin Ruby. And like, Ruby would come on and she's like, and she said, but they were super popular and had, a good string of, hit albums. They had a couple of hit albums in like 73, 74, and they played all the big festivals. But if you see any of their videos on YouTube, like, it's pretty obvious. You're like, oh yeah, David Lee Roth definitely definitely borrowed some of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's like, but it was definitely, you're dead right. I mean, that was one of the great things about this sort of class and issue, was that not only was Roth cut from a different cloth culturally than those other guys, his father became wealthier and wealthier in the course of time, where he was in middle school and high school, where he became a super successful ophthalmologist who was extremely talented and was, kind of the best in the city. So he charged a lot of money for these surgeries. And I don't mean that to cast aspersions on the guy. I mean, the guy was talented and he was the best, and he ended up buying Roth's father quite a huge house in Pasadena, a mansion really. And that's where Van Halen practiced, in the basement of this mansion. And so Roth lives there now. His father's passed on and he bought the house from his father and lives there now. But I mean, the brothers grew up and living in a two bedroom house, and Eddie slept on a converted sleeping porch on the back. I mean, the family wasn't like destitute. I don't make that sound, but they grew up in, as you imagine, like post World War II, GI Bill, small house in Pasadena, very, very modest. And then they pair up with Roth. His father's like, he's got like a 25 room mansion. It's so there was all these different, and his musical tastes were really different than the brothers. The brothers liked Black Sabbath, and Roth really liked, he liked a lot of different types of music. But if you were going to probably nail it down, what he liked Kool and the Gang more than he liked Black Sabbath. I mean, that's the truth. And so, they had places where they kind of met in the middle, but Roth liked pop music and funk music and R&B, 70s R&B stuff and Motown stuff, where the brothers were not really interested in that. And that's kind of where you got the Van Halen sound, from these different influences coming together as the one thing.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Black Oak, Arkansas.
Yep. You guys got, I mean, I'll see. I'll find it. Like, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And that's like, when you see it, when you watch, you're like, oh yeah, it's just like, it's undeniable.
I'm sure you have, but you ever get into the band?
A little bit, yeah.
Definitely. Levon Helm's from Arkansas as well. So. And
the rest of the guys are from Canada, right? A lot of them are from Canada.
Yeah. Man, I was just in the office with Trey and two other guys today. A guy across the hall from us who's going to come on the podcast here in a couple of weeks is a super big fan of the band. I was always talking about Levon Helm, telling a song like, this is what there's Chester. He's buried over here.
Right.
So anyway, yeah.
Cripple Creek.
Yeah. Oh, that's a classic, man. The Last Waltz is such an awesome album. So, but well, man, I got one other thing. Like, you got any tips just for like a young historian, this 33-year-old dude who just started teaching a couple years ago, just starting out? That would be myself.
In terms of teaching?
Well, I mean, man, teaching, but really, man, like I do have writing goals. I've had several authors on the podcast of just like different people have written books, are writing, are writers, a few historians, and man, just like I'm always asking for tips on like, hey, like how do you budget your writing time? Do you do a word quota?
Sure.
But like lecturing too, I mean, in the classroom, out of the classroom, our institution doesn't focus a lot on research, but like I have goals
Sure.
connected to that.
Sure.
So,
well, protect your time in the summer as best as you can. I mean, that was what I definitely, I mean, I wrote Van Halen Rising while I was still, teaching full time. And so I wrote most of it in the summer. And what I actually did was I tried to grab research material. So I did interviews, and I was pretty during the school year. I was pretty disciplined about going, okay, if I do an interview, I'm going to transcribe it the next day. And how I would do that typically is like, I would budget that, and I would do a 30-minute interview and it'd probably take an hour to transcribe. And so like I do it late at night, record it the next day. In between classes, I'd sit in my office hours. You know how that is, like, 80% of the time nobody shows up, and you just, you kind of blow through it. And sort of I collected all this stuff and then like kind of got geared up for like, okay, May 15th, finals are in, let's go and write and just protect the time. I understand maybe you have to teach in the summer and stuff like that, but whatever it is, like your days, like Thursdays, Fridays, I'm writing, or whatever it is. I teach Monday, Wednesday in the summer. I'm going to write. And then, the other thing is that I would say is to just try to, especially as academics, I would say if there's something that is going to be part of your portfolio for tenure, for research, I mean, really try to do that article for like, use the, this is nothing revolutionary, but write an article and then use it towards building towards a book. That's what I would really say about my cohort from graduate school, the guys who kind of did the better, woman and men who did the best were the people who did that well, like, basically had the 2 articles out of the dissertation and did that. But, because for me too, I'd say the big sense of satisfaction early on is like, oh, I've written a chapter. Like I have a chapter of this book written, I've done something. Like, you start somewhere. Like, don't start with page 1 necessarily. Maybe you start with page 100. You start right at the middle of it first, but you wrote something, and it's sort of a sense of like, okay, I have something to build upon. And I think that's what ends up happening too with a lot of writing, is that you end up with this big massive stuff, and you do have that, but to at least go, okay, I'm going to focus on this one piece, forget all this other crap. I'm going to focus on this one chunk of it, write a chapter out of this. And then you're like, okay, then I can build the next chapter from that. Go continue the story or continue the part, the next part of the book. That for me was, and then you can use that for an article for a journal or something, or whatever, like whatever publication you want, but find a topic that inspires you too. I think that's, people will say, I wrote this, you wrote all this, did all these interviews. It's like, well, I love I love a lot of things, but I love Van Halen. So it was like, probably I could have written a book about Guns N' Roses or like whatever. I mean, I could, you can think of a whole bunch of other things that I have a passion for, but if it's a topic particularly that you have a passion for, you'll be inspired to write it. I think that's the other thing too, is that kind of makes it, I don't want to say self-propelling, but it provides that impetus because you want to learn more. I want, when I hear this stuff, I wanted to learn more, and like you guys understand that from research, but I think especially if you get something you feel really, really inspired about, that's going to be, because, we all written articles, I'm sure, for different things, like, and you're just sort of like, it's just whatever interesting to me, but I'm not super interested in it. It's going to be difficult to get to a book and finished unless you're like getting paid $1 million to do a book or something like that, which is obviously, by the way, it's not a get rich quick scheme, by the way, guys. Just, I mean, it is for some people, but it's just, sort of that's the deal.
Now, I was going to ask, as far as a historical method, is it trickier? Do you have any tips for writing in sort of the near history? Plenty of academics are writing about 13th century French cooking.
Right.
And because I know one of our friends, Jeff Woods, he's writing about Vietnam pacification efforts.
Right.
And, he's doing a lot of interviews, and it's that same thing, but it seems different the closer you get to right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you try to write, I don't think historians are particularly good at assessing the present. That happens all the time. We see that more and more now, where historians sort of speak out about these things. And just in general, like, you're sort of like, well, do we really know what the effects of, the long-term effects of Katrina are going to be 1 year after Katrina? We know Katrina was terrible, but sort of like you guys understand my point. It's sort of like by obviously you can look at something and go, it's kind of on its face true. Katrina was terrible. It transformed New Orleans, but to sort of, it's kind of hard to have that, like you said, that perspective. And so, that was for me, not a huge issue, because really the book with the Van Halen book, it basically wraps up in 1978. And so, the final pages of the book, the afterward, to kind of wrap up the Van Halen story, sort of, generically in some sort of way, where it's just sort of like, and there's all this stuff happened, but to sort of reflect on the legacy of the band was probably, in some ways more tenuous than trying to think about the stuff that happened a long time ago, because, you sort of say like now, it's kind of hard to say, will people care about Van Halen in 50 years? I don't know. Some people will. Will people care about Led Zeppelin in 50 years? It's it's more than Taylor Swift. I don't know, but that's the sort of stuff where, yeah, I agree. It's sort of hard to sort of make these big, broad. You can say this is important, but to sort of say this is going to be important 100 years from now, it's kind of hard to know.
No. Well, I think what happens with them as a Van Halen fan, too many people, when they think about the soap opera, they don't realize this was probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, one of the 5 biggest bands for 15 years.
Sure.
I mean, even with this change of lead singers, all the way through, Right Here, Right Now and stuff like that. I mean, this was a huge, people don't sell albums of this volume anymore. They don't. So it's, that's what I was trying to remember. There's another academic who did some stuff on this. Is it Adam Dunn, I think is his name? He did, he was a Canadian anthropologist.
Okay.
And he started off, he has a documentary like Heavy Metal, Headbangers.
I know exactly what you mean. Yep, now I know. Yep.
But then it became like a 10-part VH1.
And now he's got his own channel on like Banger TV. It's like this whole thing, yeah.
But he was
Metal Evolution.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
That's it. But if you watch the early episodes, Van Halen steps in a lot of them. They are this bridge to get you out of, basically you've got the decline of, well, I guess, Led Zeppelin was in decline. The British guitar gods were having their problems. And they came along and they survived disco. They survived everything else.
Right.
But the trouble is that legacy is kind of diminished by, you guys can't get along. Who fired whom?
Well, and that's the other thing too. Speaking of like writing history, is there are different schools of historical writing. You go to grad school and you learn about the Whig history and the progressive historians and these different different types of schools of thought. And for me, those political categories had nothing to do with the Van Halen Rising book. But for me, I wanted to try to write a book that at the end of it, people would feel good. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it doesn't mean if something bad happened, like about the Hindenburg, you should be like, oh, it was a happy thing that all these people burned up. But, there was so much, you end up with all this negativity around something that was supposed to be fun. And I thought especially with the way I was going to write it, which was I was going to end it at the moment of fame, sort of like the Social Network movie or Straight Outta Compton, where basically the movie ends and that's the launch, right? You're like, they're off to be famous or they're off to get rich. It doesn't have to be like this, thing that you're like, I really don't like these guys. And there are rock biographies I've read, they will remain nameless. They're written by artists who at the end of it, because they're so bitter, you're like, I just like this person. And it's like, it's actually shocking to think about. Like, you go like, okay, you don't have to be like positive and happy about everything, but like, yeah, you might've gotten kicked out of a band, but you were in that band for a decade and you made millions of dollars. Yeah, you pissed the money away, but you were rich and everyone knows who you are and you're going to be on records. So we're going to, you know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't have to be all just this negative vibe. And so that for me, it wasn't unnatural to write it like that, because I thought it was a positive story. Like, these guys came out of nowhere and they broke through and they got famous. And you know what I'm saying? I think that's part of what the other thing about, and the sort of the drug and the alcohol stuff, which again, isn't really related to a lot of writing, but just sort of all that stuff that's sort of like played out. It's just like, in any genre, I mean, I don't know, if you guys are into zombie books or whatever, I'm sure there's like stuff you're like, oh, this is so played out. Please stop with this cliche or this, like, we know they did drugs. We can talk about it, but does it have to be like, we know they, had a lot of girls, or it's like, just becomes like, it's like, who cares? You know what I mean? It's like, who cares? And so that's the other thing too. It's just knowing where it sort of jumped the shark and reached a saturation point with certain things that are sort of common to certain genres. I mean, you can do it like probably books about the NFL or things where it's just sort of for a while, you're just like, really? I'm talking about, I know this. It's like a given. It's like, it's like NFL players make bad decisions off the field. Okay, we kind of know that. I mean, if you're writing a book about that, that's one thing, but it's sort of like, I don't know how to explain it. It just becomes kind of a parody after a while. We were like, and I know what's going to happen, and it's more of this. So, that was sort of my take, was that I wanted to read a book and write a book about a band that I liked, that even if there was negative stuff that went on inside the band, that he didn't go away going, I really don't like these guys. This guy's kind of shitty to this guy. And this guy, this guy is really a, kind of a jerk. And why is this guy so greedy? It's just,
yeah, that's an
I was going to say I'd get off my soapbox, but that's basically the job of this podcast, is to be on the soapbox, right? So no apologies.
No, but I've thought about.
Go ahead, Chris.
Just I think you hinted at it earlier. For these guys to make it, to be successful, they have to have they have to be big, strong, powerful personalities.
Definitely.
You're gonna, if you look at all the bands who've had personnel issues, you look at, Guns N' Roses, Kiss, you start putting all those big
Rolling Stones.
Yeah. There's going to be tension and firings, and, the Eagles, all those sort of groups. The only way you make it is if you are really big, really dedicated, and you start putting a lot of those big personalities in the same room, you're gonna have clashes.
Yeah, and I think and like you're hinting at, like, to keep it going, Al, you have to have musical talent, but you also have to have that drive to keep going. There's so many bands that they fall apart, and in part because people just don't have that innate sort of survival mode drive to keep going. Yeah, I mean, the Eagles are a classic example. I mean, where you can look at all the interpersonal clashes and think, this is sad that it got to be like that. But on the other hand, it's like the fact that the songs are so great, and they made all these great albums. I guess this is what I'm saying in terms of narrative. There's ways to sort of be honest with the story, but you can also present a story to your reader that doesn't turn people against the people. I mean, it's like you can focus on the positive. Like, well, the Eagles, some of these guys were not really great to each other, and there was some really messed up stuff that went on, but goddamn, they made some great albums, and they had a lot of success, and their songs are going to be I'm sure people are going to listen to the Eagles 100 years from now, and that's just a given. I mean, I think so. There's always the choices you can make in terms of a narrative and how you want to present a story. I remember reading this review, this one book about the Police, where the reviewer was like, I don't think the person really likes Sting at all. And it's like, you don't have to like necessarily like the guy, but it's like, read a book and be like, God, I really hate Sting now. I don't know. It's just, it's just like you're like going for some sort of like salacious, like tell-all, like gossipy thing where you're like, you don't care whether you tear the person down or not. I don't know. It's just, especially writing it from a standpoint of, I don't know those guys. I've never met those guys. I've talked to Michael Anthony, the bass player, on the phone. That's it. I don't even know if those guys read the book. I know Michael Anthony's read the book, but the other guys, I have no idea if they've even read the book or not. So the sort of like, this sort of idea of kind of people, I don't know, biographers kind of doing these stories, and it's sort of really, I don't know, you just have to be, I always figured you wanted to be thinking, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's stuff I didn't print in the book that I was told that was probably true. But you're just thinking, you know what? It's not relevant to your story. It's not relevant. Right. It's not relevant. And so, and that's the other thing too. It's just, it's you want to think about, again, leaving the reader coming away. I did with like a sense of like the core of the story was guys who didn't seem like they would ever be able to work together, guys who played a type of music which wasn't in sync at all with the music of the time, stuck it out. Guys who got offered they thought they had a record deal through Gene Simmons, the most famous musician in the world in 1976, which collapsed on them, stayed together, signed with Warner Brothers, made a record that really a lot of people in Warner Brothers didn't think was going to do all that well, and they ended up selling 2 million copies and becoming superstars. To me, that was the core part of the story rather than any of the other sort of extraneous BS.
Are there any other, without you giving away, thesis statements here, are there any other like sort of untapped areas of the band's history that you're interested in, or that you think haven't been?
Sure. I think there are, I think the breakup in 1995, which there was obviously a lot of ugly stuff that went on, 85, sorry, that went around with that. To me, it's so interesting how the band fell apart, reformed, you formed it with the Sammy Hagar, and then there were two bands basically competing with each other. And I always thought that was a super interesting time. And then when you look at particularly how it all ended up working out, that by the early 90s, David Lee Roth's career had really started to take a nosedive. He really was slipping to the point where by 1991, really, he was kind of had fallen to where he was playing smaller arenas at best and had to cancel a tour, where Van Halen continued on until Hagar left. They kind of won that battle. So that whole period of time is really interesting to me. But there are other bands I would definitely consider writing about as well. And there's actually topics I'm interested in that aren't even music related, but that I think in part because I experienced it as a kid, the breakup. It's like Chris did. Yeah, everybody did. Like you're sort of like you live through it. It's like it'd be like if you're a Red Sox fan talking about the ball going through Bill Buckner's legs or something like that. It's like everyone remembers, like, how could this have happened? This wasn't supposed to happen this way. And for me, that's what's interesting too, because I look back on it. I don't even it was still so still so shocking to me that actually ended up happening. And then I don't really think, even though there's been a ton of art magazine articles that have kind of touched on it, I don't ever think, because the Van Halen brothers have never done a book, and I don't really know if we can totally trust Sammy Hagar's perspective. He's got his one perspective. Ross got a perspective. Obviously, they're biased. So you don't really get like I would like to get more of like the 10,000-foot view about what actually like happened, because I'm not even sure those guys know, because they can say they know, but they just sort of like had their sort of like very tunnel vision, understandably so, perspective on this thing. So, but they're yeah.
I would say part of it too is that you hit on this. Is the grind cycle these guys would have been on. It's you crank out an album, you go on tour for 9 months, you barely come off the road, repeat. I mean, they effectively did that from 78 to 85. So
the right.
I've always go ahead.
No, I was sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just saying really quickly. Yeah, that was basically the record company set it up that way. It's like it was basically an album a year you were supposed to deliver, and so you figured out, the album comes out, you go on the road, guess what? You owe them another record. So
yeah, I think that was the one thing when they came, they just became the biggest band. They've sold 1 million albums. They come off the road. Warner Brothers, great. You owe us $1 million.
right.
And it's why, if you look at the liner notes on their first albums, Brian, a lot of the early Van Halen albums are recorded in insanely short periods of time. They write it, they played it on stage. I think Van Halen 2 was like 6 days. And
It's
I
quick,
think
yeah.
Women and Children First was 3 weeks. Because that was all the time you had to get off the road, because at that point you're costing your record deal company money. But I think when you do that from effectively, like you said, late 77 until 85, that's going to take a toll on people.
Yeah, and man, that's just and that's become, with digital music, that's something that artists getting compensated and like, because it seems like bands like Panic, they bought all of their records like at a certain point in their career.
Oh, they bought back their masters?
Yes, right. And so now they own all their own music. They own the rights to all their own music, so they're not under a label or anything, but they're still playing, really big shows. I mean, sold out shows for wherever they want to go. I saw them play at the Ryman, a sold out show in Nashville last year, which is really
cool.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a fascinating topic in and of itself, is like the record label's involvement, and then like how certain bands have just like Tool, man, they cashed in on the digital shift.
Right.
But I got one, a bubble. It was crazy.
One that I thought was interesting, that was, the last couple last maybe 2 chapters of the book I went pretty quickly on, because that way they've got the first album out. But
Sure.
I think one of the things that I found really interesting when you were talking about how Warner Brothers basically went from Black Sabbath was their kind of moneymaker, and then all of a sudden, hey, it's these new guys from California. It'd be an interesting vignette of Warner Brothers basically, saying thanks to Black Sabbath, you're yesterday's news.
Right.
But
I'm laughing because I have a video file of a biography channel's biography on Black Sabbath, which I don't think is available on TV anymore. It was made like 10, 15 years ago. But like Geezer Butler, this is great. The Geezer Butler, the bass player, I may have quoted him in the book, said like that I'm laughing. So Black Sabbath was like, one of the premier acts on Warner Brothers. And so Warner Brothers now has Van Halen opening for Black Sabbath. And like, there was a party to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Black Sabbath, or the 10th anniversary of Black Sabbath or something. I don't remember. And I guess Van Halen showed up at the party. All the Warner Brothers guys it's like a party for Black Sabbath. It's like, oh, here's our new guy, David Lee Roth. And those guys were just like, holy shit. It's, yeah. And, you can look in the 90s where, a lot of the glam metal bands kind of saw the turning of the tide too. Were like, oh, you know what? See you later. Whatever, Warrant, Cinderella, all these other bands that had been kind of the cash cows for these labels. It's like, hey, Nirvana's here. It's the same type of thing. But yeah, the changing of the guard is really interesting. And the other thing too is that I talk about in the Van Halen book, and I talk about it more in the Ted Templeman biography, is that Ted Templeman, who was their producer, told me that one of the things that almost always happened when a band like Van Halen got a record deal, they wrote their own songs. The label offered to buy the publishing. Now, I should preface this by saying I'm not like a lawyerly expert on royalties and all these things. But basically, if you own your song publishing, sheet music, when the records are played on the radio, there's always a sort of getting money. But the publishing, which means the songwriting, is super valuable. So if you look at any Van Halen record, it says Van Halen Music. And it turns out that Ted, their producer, said, I shouldn't be doing this, but they're going to offer to buy your publishing. Do not sell your publishing, because that's the kind of the key thing that long term, even if your band has flopped, if your music gets used for TV or radio or it gets whatever, you still have that mailbox money from songwriting. And they held on to that smartly. Those guys held on to that. So even if they were $1.2 million in debt to the record company, which is all the money the record company. Like every time they got a limo, oh yeah, we're riding in a limo. Cha-ching, Warner Brothers is charging. Oh yeah, let's order all the takeout. You know, on the menu, the room service menu, everything. You know, we're partying, and like that was all that stuff was charged to the record company. And I get that's part of the way the record company kept people, no doubt, kept those guys working. You saw these records, you saw all this money, but that was a separate, you know, that was a separate deal. That's the songs you wrote. That money comes. That's not involved with the record quote unquote company. That's directly involved with the songwriter. And so. Yeah, if people, those guys at Widespread Panic, if they own their publishing and they own their masters, they must be in pretty good, you know, for what it's worth, they must be in pretty good shape, better than some. I'm sure you guys have seen like Kanye kind of ranting on Twitter about how, like, you know, I don't know, he doesn't own his masters. I'm not going to feel bad for Kanye's financial situation, but when the label owns the albums, the songs, I mean, they control. Ultimately, they can veto, like, oh, we're not doing this, we're doing that with the music, and they decide. They basically have veto power of the way the songs can kind of exist in the world.
Now, did Ted Templeton stay with Van Halen into the Hagar years as the album producer? He,
well, yeah, it's funny you asked that question. He did not produce 5150. He produced the 6 albums with Roth, and then he produced Roth's EP. Crazy from the Heat, and he produced the next record, which is called Eat 'Em and Smile, with Roth. So he in effect went with Roth, even though if you read the book, anyone who reads the book will kind of see that Ted sort of talks about how that all, you know, it wasn't as if as he said, he had sort of a willful choice to go with Dave. He didn't want the band to break up at all, but that's how it went down.
Mm-hmm. Well, I knew that there was a little bit of tension. You could see that. You first saw the album was called Diver Down. Basically it's a full-length album, but it's got 5 or 6 covers on it.
Right.
They got away from like that sort of, you know, dirty, they called it the brown tone a little bit. So you started to see, you know, artistic differences start to appear a little bit. So I was curious, you know, if I don't remember if Templeton came back and did any of the later Van Halen albums. You know,
he never did any of the records with Hagar until the 1991 record, the Foreign Lawful Carnal Knowledge record. He co-produced that. He was brought back to co-produce that. But the ones that they did, the 5150, OU812, those were all done without Ted.
Okay.
So, Greg, both your Van Halen Rising and your biography about Ted are on Audible, I see,
right.
Which I just became aware of since we're on the podcast. So I've done 70 Audible books this year. So
wow.
I will get around to them. My goal is to do 100. So, I'll check them out.
Thank you. That would be great. Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
I'll link them up when I share the episode.
Thanks. Yeah, I've never listened to them because it's too weird to hear some guy I don't know reading my book. It's just, there's no offense to the guy or anything on my book. It's just like weird. I was like, I don't know how to explain it. It's just weird. So, but yeah, I appreciate that very much. Yeah, the audio book, and then there's Kindle books as well.
That's how I got it when it came out.
Kindle and physical copy also
on Kindle.
Yeah.
Well, just like most academics, I have an overly healthy library.
Yeah, exactly. That's the books that I have on the Kindle. I am always appreciative when I'm on an airplane or something like that. Definitely.
Yeah, I got signed up for Kindle, but like I need to get. I'll have to get with you, Chris, because I've never used it. But there's a couple Arkansas history books that I wanted for my class. I couldn't get anywhere else. So, but I mean, I know so many people that do it, but I've just been on Audible, honestly. So, yeah.
It's another suck you in. If you've got Amazon Prime, they'll offer you, what is it, Kindle Unlimited.
I think that's what I signed up for. I just never used it. Yeah.
Thank you for your another $39 or however much it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting is that Kindle in theory, can make a book disappear off your device. It's like, oh, you know, whatever. I think they didn't. There's a couple books that were withdrawn by the publisher, and it's like, you know, basically you buy a book and it gets withdrawn by the publisher, and you have it on your shelf, but they're not going to come take it out of your house. But like, you know, Kindle can be like make it disappear off your device, which is kind of So, you know, we're living in a digital age. What can I say? It's a weird thing, but yeah, it's definitely convenient.
Yeah. Well, hell yeah, man. Well, this has been a great topic, Greg, a great conversation. About a lot of awesome stuff, man. Black Oak, Arkansas, at Tulsa. What is my favorite Irish pub? Kilkenny's. I go eat there every time I'm in town.
I can walk there from here. So.
Oh, hell yeah.
So guys, definitely call me or email me when you guys are coming to town for sure, and drag Trey along with you because I'd love to see him again. He's a good dude. Tell him I said hi.
For sure, man. I will. I want to have him on the podcast soon. So I was joking. I was like, man, people at work will watch it.
Who's wants to be added to the meeting? Oh, it's Greg. Oh, by the way, I just realized my kids' names are on my screen, by the way. There you go. That's how fast I switched over. So, hey, I appreciate it very much, guys. Thanks for having me on, and enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
All right, man. Have a good one. Take it easy.
You too. Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
You too.